Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for this segment, we have Coffey, market strategist at TD Ameritrade, to discuss the November reading for the Investor Movement Index. The IMX is TD Ameritrade's proprietary behavior-based index, aggregating Main Street investor positions and activity to measure what investors actually were doing and how they were positioned in the markets. Alex, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me, Jill. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, the IMX just coming out in the last 24 hours, showing continued decreasing exposure from the retail clients at TD Ameritrade, notably now building on a 3-month trend of reduced exposure and 2 months of net selling of equities.
Yeah, and it's interesting because November had somewhat of a stronger month relative to other times of the year that we've looked at in 2022. But I thought what's interesting was if you take a look at the buys and the sells, right? The buys are really concentrated in those large cap growth names that investors have really been drawn to over the past decade.
Yeah, I think this is an important and critical point of sort of what we're seeing within the data. First, you noted the outperformance of the equity market during the November period for the IMX. You actually saw the Nasdaq 100 up almost 2%, a little bit over 200 points during that period. And many of the names that found buying activity, although the overall activity was net selling, was many of those mega cap tech firms that have garnered so much attention over the last few years, be it a name like Tesla or even Meta platforms that stuck out, and of course have both been underperforming lately and underperformed during the November period. You saw Tesla down 20%. And while Meta bounced back after announcing some layoffs during that period, Jill, it had been a name that had reached a new low during the November period. And so I think those names had been offered maybe the benefit of the doubt by the retail investor. They had been winners for so long, and this is being perceived as an opportunity to buy into some beaten up long-term winners. But you had the names like Apple and Microsoft and Amazon getting attention as well. And those are seen as names that had been stalwarts for so long, particularly Apple. And anytime we see any weakness, we oftentimes do see net buying in Apple. The November month, no exception. Stock down about 5%. It garnered some attention. It was net bought.
Right. And you know, what's interesting, each month that we cover this, it always seems to be it's more of a mixed bag when you take a look at what the net sells were.
No doubt. And this is, of course, no exception to that either. But one real, I think, key lining between all of them is their names that mostly did well or had been doing well leading into November. So one, you'll see Netflix. Netflix was down small during the month, about 3.5%. But throughout the IMX period of November, it reached a level it hadn't reached since mid-April, when it collapsed on that earnings announcement that really built on 2 consecutive disappointing quarters. So investors had been net buying Netflix as it had continued to slide. It's seen a multi-month recovery for the better part of 6 months and started to catch some net selling over the last few IMX periods. A couple of the other names, one of them that really stuck out to me was NVIDIA. NVIDIA was a semiconductor name, of course, been under pressure through much of 2022, but did start to show signs of bouncing back over the last month and a half. However, halfway through the period, you saw NVIDIA announce its earnings, and it actually started turning back to the downside. That, I think, highlighted that while investors had been attempting to buy into these names that have underperformed, there isn't enough in that confidence yet for them to be long-term necessarily holders in some of these names. And NVIDIA, while it was up 17.5%, did have that more negative second half of the month, net sellers there. And then Boeing, strongest performer in the Dow, industrial name, bouncing back a little bit, was net sold in addition to those other tech names.
Right. And Alex, if we take a look at the millennial investor behavior, it's interesting. They bought 2 sectors holistically, consumer discretionary and finance. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, consumer discretionary was net bought amongst many of the populations, including the total population. You saw names like Tesla and Amazon largely leading to that. But financials was interesting to me as well. And I think it highlights another key distinction between the millennial population for the month of November and the overall client population. Is if you compare the overall headline numbers as well, Jill, the risk exposure decreased by a smaller factor for millennials. And I think this highlights just a different type of investor a younger investor is than, let's say, the average, the entire population, which includes, of course, people who are maybe closer to retirement, maybe have a different investment horizon or risk goals. So financials, obviously, interesting time with the rate environment, inflation, economic picture. But this to me is investors taking millennial investors taking a chance here, investing in something that maybe they believe in on a longer term time horizon, and willingness to be investors as opposed to traders, given their longer time to, let's say, retirement.
All right. Appreciate the insight as always. Alex, thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.